Thank you, Bob, and thank you for the incredible welcome. Now, does anybody know what this is? It's a what? Okay, I'm going to assume somebody said manger. Did you say manger? Yeah, that's a manger. Almost everything in Israel is made out of stone. There's not a lot of wood, especially you think about in ancient times, people work with the resources they have. You can tell this is a manger. Look at the little gadget here that's going to hold whatever animal that you would be trying to feed some hay or some water, and you can just tie them up there and they can eat, and when you're ready for the animal you can untie them. Or if you had an emergency delivery and needed to lay a baby somewhere, it's just about right, don't you think? Man, I tell you, it's a shock. Now let's we're gonna deal with the Christmas story this morning, and we'll take a break, and then we'll be back, and we're going to go with Jesus and the disciples to a place called Caesarea Philippi. That is the first geographic location I think I ever stumbled across as I was reading the Bible one morning, as I was just going into ministry, and when I did the research on Caesarea Philippi, could not believe. Thank you so much. Could not believe the difference it made. So we'll share that right after our break this morning. King of Bethlehem, let's go there. Who's the King of Bethlehem? Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. It's one of these verses you've read all your life probably without paying much attention to it, because you're trying to, you want to know about Jesus when you open up the Gospels. And Matthew said in chapter 2, verse 1, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. Well, that's pretty early in the story to mention the political situation. Look at Luke's gospel. Everybody reads Luke's Christmas story at Christmas at some point. I mean, that's where we resonate with Luke's version of the story more than Matthew. Chapter 1, verse 5. Those of you who are kind of the Bible scholars in the room, teach Sunday school, lead a small group, pastor a church, whatever, you already know that the first 4 verses of Luke's gospel, he's saying, Theophilus, you asked me for an orderly account. Here it is. Here's the story of Jesus. And in verse 5, he gets started. And of all things he could say first about the Jesus story, this is the information he gives you. Matthew and Luke both thought you needed to know this entire story happened under the shadow, under the influence of King Herod. If you were writing a story about your life and sending it back in time to Luke or Matthew, you would probably include the information that you're an American, and right now we're living under the reign of King Trump. Would you not? I mean, that's our political situation. It's just that's some nervous laughter, because let's move on. All right, so let's just go right straight to Israel. Remember, you can fit about 4 Israels across the state of Alabama. You can fit 6 Israels into the state of Alabama. You just divide landmass. You go down to a place like Bethlehem, you're going to find a very crowded city today. So, and if you downloaded that resource, you probably already picked up this information, but you can look at the population of Alabama, and then 9 million people live in Israel, and you can fit 6 of that landmass into the state of Alabama. It's very, very crowded. This is Palestinian city. When you get to Bethlehem, it doesn't look like your Christmas cards. It doesn't sound like your Christmas cards. They're selling falafel on every corner. Do you know what falafel is? Anybody had falafel? Let me just give you a heads up. If any food group rhymes with the word awful, leave it alone, okay? So, here we go. Well, let's go down to Bethlehem one more time, because if you go on a tour of Israel and you get into Bethlehem, you want to see Christmas, right? So they're going to take you to the Church of the Nativity. The door of humility leads into this place. It's a very small door. You'll find that evangelical Christians from America don't necessarily resonate with all that you'll find in all of these churches. There's an orthodox feeling to all of it. Why is it a church? The church is built over a cave. The church is built over a cave. Now, a minute ago I showed you the manger being made of stone. That's kind of a shock to our senses. I thought it was wooden. I thought it was a red barn somewhere in New England with snow on the ground, because that's what my Christmas cards always said. Not really. There are caves all over the Judean mountain ridge up here on the top, and Bethlehem is actually slightly higher in elevation than Jerusalem. Not much, but a little bit. But the wind and the erosion has created a lot of caves, and here we go down these steps into an area that's covered up with rugs. You can't tell that it's a cave unless somebody tells you, hey, notice the ceiling. It's a rock ceiling. Notice some of these walls behind the rugs, and you can look behind the rug, and it's a rock. It's rock. It's a cave. And down on this marble floor, this is the traditional location of the birth of Jesus. And you'll find a lot of people putting prayer requests down here or putting some oil down inside that hole and putting it on the prayer request. Different traditions, different Christian faith traditions from all over the world. It's not anything I resonate. I've never touched the hole or the star. But this silver star, very, very important in tradition. It was actually stolen one time, and a war developed to get it back. That's crazy, isn't it? But this is a cave. Let me show you something to help communicate better the fact that it's a cave. Right next door is the Church of St. Catherine's. It's a Catholic church. It's a new church, not even 100 years old. The Church of Nativity is one of the oldest, maybe the oldest church in the world. It dates back to the 4th century. And so we're pretty sure this is the location where Jesus was born, but they have completely covered it up. Now, you can go down also underneath the Church of St. Catherine's. Now, these two churches are literally side by side. You just walk out of the door of one and into the door of the other. A little tiny little courtyard separates them. The two caves underneath these two churches also are connected. St. Jerome lived in this cave for a while, so they talk about St. Jerome's cave. You can find the door that connects these two caves. You can look through the peephole and notice that it's a shut door. It is really tightly shut. And you look through the peephole and you're looking at the cave underneath the Church of the Nativity. And you'll also see always a big crowd of people down there in that cave. Sometimes you wait in line for, I hate it, but you wait in line. People came all this way to see Christmas, and then they closed the cave because of some religious service. But you find people looking like that going, this does not feel like Christmas. But what I wanted you to see, the reason we brought you to the church was it's a cave. It's a cave, it's a cave, it's a cave. Remember that as we go along. That's a pretty humble place to be born. We'll try to find a cave before we leave here. Now, what we're going to do is chase down the King of Bethlehem, because the King of Bethlehem was Herod the Great. And Herod the Great, his presence cannot be overstated. Let's, for instance, go about 3 miles from Bethlehem to an archaeological site called the Herodian. And if you look, this is Manger Square. This is where the Church of the Nativity is. And we got up high in a tower, a mosque tower, and did this video several years ago. There's the Herodian. You can see this thing from Jerusalem. I'll show you a picture later on from Jerusalem of the Herodian. The Herodian was a big hill out on the ridge. It's for security reasons. Herod, wanted this particular location, and then Herod built a mountain to go around the hill, a man-made mountain. And on top, there's living quarters on the inside. There's water storage areas, food storage areas. This is a fortress. And it's a palace. It's a place where Herod could take his family if he felt like they were under some kind of threat. It's a place he could take himself. It was also the way, look how this sand, it looks like, comes down like this. This was taken in the spring. If you go there this time of the year, none of this green is going to show up. Herod had, as he built the mountain, 1 bucket of rocks at the time by people who did this for him. They would pour the rocks down the side, and it was supposed to look like a marble mountain, and it could be seen from miles away. The tower went up 6 more stories. There were actually 3 more shorter towers on it. There's all kinds of palace. There's a Garden of Eden in here. There's no water in this area, and Herod always had water. Herod loved this location, and he wanted to be buried here. So right here you can see the little theater that he built for private family entertainment, and also he was starting to envision the day he would die, and this is where the eulogy would be given, and it was given. The place that he was buried, it took years to find it, and it was not found till 2005, I believe, might have been 2007, but it's right here, and it's represented by something that's been built there to make it, people be able to see the spot. That's not what it was. People destroyed the burial site of Herod and probably burned his bones. They hated him. Oh, they hated him. Down lower was a governmental complex. Herod moved all of the finances of his kingdom out here, all of the military, administrative work. Think Pentagon, think all the office buildings in Washington. He moved it out of Jerusalem over to the Herodian. It's a more secure location. But he also is going to build a swimming pool everywhere he has a palace. Remember, there's very little water here, and yet he had a swimming pool built here twice as large as an Olympic pool. It had an island in the middle. It's so large, it literally had small boats in it. We know this kind of information because of a historian named Josephus. You'll hear his name. You'll read his name a lot in research materials. So there's the swimming pool. It's surrounded by the columns. It was an absolutely, it must have been spectacular. There was a pool house. It's wherever Herod had a palace, luxury was the norm, and it's stunning at the amount of luxury he had. Now this is the largest single palace, we believe, that was built anywhere in the world at the time. This is Herod the Great. The wild thing about Herod, and remember, Luke and Matthew both told you right up front, Herod the Great was king when Jesus was born. They wanted you to know this, and do the study on who Herod is, and you'll know more and more and more about it. This was not the only palace. Remember how small and narrow Israel is? He had palaces in Caesarea, Sebast, that's the capital. It used to be the capital city of Samaria. 3 palaces in Jericho, eventually combined into one. Of course, a palace in Jerusalem, one in Machaerus, that's where John the Baptist was executed, and then at Masada. Now, if you've been to Israel, you probably visited Masada. It is the most visited location in Israel today, in part because Jewish people love it. You know the story of the Alamo in America. Masada has a story very similar to that, where a group of people took Masada, a group of rebels, and as Rome began to take back Israel after a revolt, they decided they'd rather die as free people rather than to be captured alive by the Romans. But originally this was Herod's palace. The northern palace, he built on that stair step an amazing array of living quarters, a swimming pool, and an observation deck. The northern end would always catch the breeze, and so that was the summer palace. So he built a second palace on top of this rock. This is a mountain. He didn't build the mountain. It was an existing mountain. It reminds me of the ship Titanic. It looks like a ship out there in the desert. It's completely surrounded. I mean, you can't get up there. If there's people on the top who don't want you to get up, you can't get up there. The Romans couldn't get up there until they built a siege ramp. All of the walls, by the way, if you see a black line, everything under the black line was as it was found by archaeologists in the last 100 years, including plaster and paint. So picture plaster on all of the walls that you see here. It looks like pretty rough, like I'm not sure that's a luxurious palace when you see all of it, but you can see the plaster on those walls. This was food storage areas. There was food stored here from all over the world, exotic foods, wine that was stored here from all over the world, especially the European wine. You could live up here for years. if he needed to. And Herod built this fortress for his permanent protection. No matter what happened to him politically, he would always have Masada. And he loved the desert, and he loved doing things that were impossible. This thing is 5 football fields high. They quarried the rock from the top of Masada, and they hauled the other material up. Pretty amazing place, don't you think? I mean, it really is. It's an amazing place. Look at that. By the way, that's the tram. This is where the tram, stops when it reaches the top. This is the snake path. If you want to hike it, it takes about 45 minutes for a very healthy person to hike it. It's usually over 100 degrees, so it's not exactly a common thing. Most people would prefer to take the tram. Let's just put it that way. It's quicker, it's easier, and almost always the tram doesn't fall off of the wires on its way up there. Now, my question would be very quickly, and I have hearing loss as it is. By the way, if you ever go into ministry and God grants you the gift of hearing loss, it's not the worst handicap to ever have as a pastor. There are not enough ministers in the room to even laugh at that joke. But anyway, what was I asking you about? Oh, I am asking you a question, but I may not be able to hear it. But how do you think Herod got up there? How do you think Herod got up there? Somebody carried him. I heard that. Maybe one of those things you'd see in the Orient. Maybe he rides an animal up there. Maybe he took the tram. How many of you think he ran up the mountain? Herod the Great loved to race his soldiers in places like this. Herod the Great participated in the Olympic Games, the original Olympic Games. Herod was quite the athlete. He was a ladies' man. He was very physically fit. He was completely consumed by lust. And yet also consumed by paranoia. He married the love of his life, and then out of fear that she might commit adultery on him on one of his long road trips, and he had some long road trips, he decided to put her to death so that nobody else could love her. He also killed the 2 sons that she had born to him. He killed another son that another wife, he had like somewhere between 8 and 12 wives, we're not even sure. He killed 3 of his sons. He killed so many family members. I one time made a list. It's amazing how many family members he killed. He was paranoid. He was afraid that one of those sons would try to become king before he died. He was also afraid he would die. Of course, he did eventually die. And he died of a sexually transmitted disease, is the best guess the scholars have. He pretty much rotted from the inside out. And personally, I hope it was very painful and it lasted a long time. But the reason I bring this up is that you will hear occasionally or read articles about Herod's good side, about all of the advances in technology. And you will also hear some scholars say that the fact that the Bible says he killed the babies of Bethlehem, he said, that's fiction. That's fiction. That the writers of the Bible just made that up to make him look like a bad guy. And if you ever read someone who says something like that, just know they have not done their homework. Close the book. Because you can read any book you want to on Herod and find out the number of his family members and friends that he killed just because he had a bad dream about them. And he killed his favorite wife to keep her from having adultery, to keep her from committing adultery, and then he grieves for her the rest of his life. The guy was kind of crazy. As the end of his life approached, he was down in Jericho trying to soak up the sun. He thought it would be good for his health. He realized one of his servants leaned over and whispered to him on what the servant hoped would be his deathbed and said, "Such a pity. When Herod dies, no one in Israel will grieve." Unfortunately for that servant, Herod rallied from his deathbed and the servant lost his life. And Herod made a decree that that popular people in the communities in Israel would be arrested. So we'd arrest Bob Smith in this community, and maybe a teacher, and maybe the mayor of the town, or whatever you have. Somebody that people loved and respected. Hold them in a very public place, and when news comes that Herod has died, execute them. This is true. I'm not making this up. Execute them. Then there will be grief in Israel when Herod dies. That's who you're dealing with Herod the Great. By the way, his sons, the three that lived through their father's fathering skills, the three sons that lived through this, one of them would be Herod Antipas, who met Jesus on the day that Jesus was crucified. They checked 3 or 4 times, I'm sure, to make sure their father was dead, and then they released all of those people. So, Bob, you're allowed to live on. And there was no grief when Herod died in all of Israel. I used to say that. This is Herod the Great. This is why Matthew and Luke assumed you and I would know the impact of this statement that they both said early on. I mean, you think about Matthew's genealogy in chapter 1. Chapter 2 is almost the very beginning of the Jesus story, and he tells you in the first verse, Herod was king. Luke says in verse 5, the beginning of his Jesus story, Herod was king. This is the guy. This is the kind of guy that would take a mountain and say, I want to make a palace out of it. This is the kind of guy who would go over to the edge of the Mediterranean and take a small village, annihilate it, and say, I need an international seaport here. This is a very straight line, and Herod built a man-made seaport at Caesarea. And because he had been to Italy, because he had been to Greece, because he hobnobbed with all of the big names of the day, the emperor and Cleopatra and Mark Antony and all the rest, he wanted to build a Greek-styled, a Roman-styled city in Israel that they would recognize the minute they landed on Israeli soil, on Judean soil. So this theater, it seats about 3,000 today. They're having concerts here today. I find it fascinating when I read passages in the Bible about in the last days the ancient cities are going to come back to life, and this is one of those places. Here's Herod's palace that he built at Caesarea. This is the palace portion, the ruins of it right here, surrounded by columns. This is a swimming pool he built jutting out into the ocean. Freshwater swimming pool in a saltwater ocean, the Mediterranean. That's exactly the kind of stuff that Herod would do. That's just his personality. By the way, what about, how did he have it built? People assume maybe he used slaves or whatnot. No. He used his money to pay for all of this to be done. He had more money than the rest of the country put together combined. You can still see the tile work from the swimming pool, and clearly where it was cut into this little rock this rock that juts out into the ocean. So there's the palace. Here is the harbor right here, and there's a temple built to honor the Roman emperor as God on earth right here at it was up on a high hill, so that when your ship crossed the horizon, and the first thing you would see of Israeli soil was a temple like you would find in other parts of the Roman Empire that says the Roman emperor is God on earth, God incarnate, and he's Lord over this land. Isn't that crazy? And so this is the harbor that he had built. He had he designed underwater concrete. I mean, the guy he was a brilliant guy. He obviously didn't do the labor himself. How do you get the fresh water into this city? It's on a saltwater ocean. He went over to Mount Carmel, which is about 17 miles away, and there were some springs at the bottom of Mount Carmel, and he built 2 aqueducts, then a 3rd aqueduct, and before it was over there, at least 5 aqueducts that brought fresh water into Caesarea. And you see them today, you're absolutely overwhelmed with who Herod is, and he is indeed, as Matthew and Luke told us, the King of Bethlehem. That's Herod the Great. We're here to talk about Christmas. Matthew and Luke said this is an important part of the Christmas story. I would implore you not to send out Christmas cards this year honoring Herod the Great, though, because that's not That's just not gonna gain you many friends. So, but if you ever get to go, by the way, you can climb up on top of this aqueduct and you can see the channels here that brought in the water. And the water didn't always flow. There'd be more water in the winter than the spring, and so there was a huge reservoir that has since washed away. That was kind of like the water tank in every community you'd see in our country. Amazing city, Caesarea. The modern city of Caesarea is there. That's where Benjamin Netanyahu lives. It's the wealthiest community in Israel. It's got the only golf course in Israel. So this is pretty high rent territory here. Well, let's go find Mary and Joseph, shall we? Nazareth is about 75 miles in a straight line from Bethlehem. Maybe not quite that far if you were to go through Samaria, but it's a 75-mile journey from Nazareth to Jerusalem by way of the Jordan River Valley. Population today, 77,000. It is a very large and crowded city. It's not a Palestinian city, it's Arab. There's a difference. All of the Arabs who live in Nazareth are Israeli citizens. They elect members to represent them in the Knesset, the ruling body. This is another one of those churches that's built over a traditional site. This one has no historical value, but it is a very pretty church. This is supposed to be where Mary got the word that she was going to be mother of the Christ child. This is the Church of the Annunciation. It's an attractive church. The traffic is so bad there, we just kind of look at it from a distance and keep moving when we take groups over there. But it is a nice church. I give them that. Mary and Joseph grew up in this community. Now, again, 77,000 people here. The population of Nazareth, 400 to 1,000, very small village. Everybody knew everybody. Don't think for a moment that anybody believed Mary's story that she's pregnant by way of some miracle from God. They took biology 101 too. They know where babies come from. Her mother didn't believe it. Her daddy didn't believe it. Cousins didn't believe it. Her reputation was trashed from forever and forevermore. I'd like to say more about that. Let me just say this, because for time purposes, I could talk about all that happens here for about 3 hours, but we're not going to do that, obviously. So here's something that I was able to record in your church, or at least begin the recording. We've got a podcast called Secrets from the Ancient Past. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on any podcasting platform. Secrets from the Ancient Past. Well, our website for that is secretsfromtheancientpast.com. This Christmas, we're going to have 5 sessions. There'll be about 10 minutes each with video from each one, and we'll be talking more about some of the details I'm having to leave out in this this presentation. But I was able to record them here. I'm very grateful for that opportunity, and I hope you'll check that out, secretsfromtheancientpast.com. So let me move on. Mary and Joseph traveled to Bethlehem. No doubt they did not go through Samaria. That was a straight line. They took an extra day to go from Nazareth down to the Jordan River Valley. They've got to stay where the water is, the way your automobile has to stay where the fuel pumps are. So they go to the Jordan River Valley, walk all the way down. Took them 3 days. Mary's pregnant by this time. Took them 3, maybe 4 days to get to Jericho. They spend the night. And you saw this yesterday if you were with us then on the last walk Jesus took to the cross. Imagine Mary, pregnant, young. She's made this trip before with her family. Joseph has made this trip before with his family. They know the route. They know what's coming. As they spend the night in Jericho, and they probably get up in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning or so, trying to beat the heat of the day. And the worst part of this journey is the first 2 to 3 miles. And then it's just, finish the 15-mile trip up to Jerusalem. It's another 5 miles to Bethlehem. Here's a question for you. Did Mary ride a donkey on this trip? Your Christmas card said she did, so maybe she did, okay? We'd like to think she rode a donkey. Somebody recently said something to me that made me rethink the idea that they walk to Christmas and they only walk to Christmas. Every carpenter today has a pickup truck. Joseph was a carpenter and his version of a pickup truck would have been a donkey. So maybe indeed she had a donkey. So I feel better about that, although I have never invited a 9-month pregnant woman to ride a donkey, and I do not plan on ever doing that again. I have my youngest daughter, who's pregnant for the 3rd time in 4 years, who is we could do this experiment. I could get a donkey and ask, hey, Courtney, I need to, just biblically, I need to know what it's like. Could you ride this donkey for 5 days? Anyway, I don't think she'd give me a Christmas present. They finally made it to Bethlehem. Of course, they did not visit a church. Can you imagine how tired she was? How stressed Joseph was. After a journey like that, the concept that she could have been medically in an emergency situation is so easy to comprehend. I'll take anything, Joseph says. I have got to get this girl to where she can lay down in some kind of shelter. And the manager of the inn, he wasn't, it's not like a Holiday Inn. It's people who had these homes in Bethlehem, and they have these caves all around them, and people would build their home either adjoining a cave or near the cave, and they would use the cave as an easy way to have an extra room or a place to keep the animals. If your family is growing and you have extra children, you can spend the next 7-8 months after she tells you another one's coming, carving out this soft stone rock and bringing it out and getting a room ready for your growing family. And when all the children leave home, I don't know about you, but we celebrated. We went to Disney World. That's what we did with the empty nest. Now, when all of them leave home, you've got these extra rooms around, and so people had, either a gift of hospitality, and they would let strangers stay in their extra rooms, the caves, just so they could have shelter, or they might have even made a little money. But Joseph takes one that had been used by animals. Somebody had some sheep, goats, cattle, whatever, and during inclement weather, you'd want to keep them in there, and so that's where he stayed. Well, in 2012, I was doing some work for the Christian Television Network, and we talked a guy into hemping us out. I said, I don't want to see another church. I want to get out of town somewhere where we can see something that would have looked like that. And he kept trying to take me to the church, and I said, no, I know it's not where Jesus was born. I just want to visually see it. We're taking pictures, we're taking video. And he took us to a place, and lo and behold, not only did we find a natural cave that had not been overwhelmed by housing, but we found some shepherds there. And I'll show you that in just a minute. But first, I want to make sure you see that right as they got to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, they walked under the shadow of Herod the Great. Just don't forget who Herod is. And as Joseph is willing to take basically what amounts to a barn for a place for his wife to give birth, they pass under the world's largest palace. It's got a swimming pool so large in it that they got boats there, and there are people lounging around, and they can eat all they want, and they have wine from Europe. It's amazing. The contrast between the King of Bethlehem and the King of Kings, of all places, for the Son of God, the real Son of God, not the emperor, to be born. A poor village, and in a place where the animals stay. Just wanted to point that out. So anyway, in 2012, we get there. We're outside of town pretty good ways, but we're still along that ridge, and we found some shepherds watching their sheep. I thought that was pretty cool in and of itself. This was the springtime. The grass wouldn't be green in the fall when Jesus was probably born. Don't know exactly when he was born. The writers of Gospels don't even care. They don't keep up with birthdays. But look at this thing showing up right over here, this little cave. This is what I'm talking about, these natural caves. They're all over the ridge, and it's bigger than you think. Several of us could fit inside this cave. And I was able to go in there, cleaned it up a little bit. People have been camping out in there. And I want to pause this video for a moment, and I want you to notice the rocks that are right here. You can go in, I've been in lots of these caves, And there's always an area a little elevated and with a few more rocks here. And what happens is, this is a place, let's say it starts raining, one of those showers comes up, and the shepherd and his flocks duck into this cave. Well, the shepherd, maybe he's got a sandwich that he packed before he went out to work that day. He's got something he's going to eat. Or maybe he wants to take a nap. And all of these sheep and all of these goats are going to be in here, and he wants at least one place clean enough to eat his sandwich and lay down, put his head down on dirt and not. Do you know why this grass is so green? Lots of sheep, lots of goats. And so they put a place that's a little elevated so that the sheep and goats won't bother them. And it was a place like that where Mary lay down, and maybe something out of their packs. She had a pillow, and maybe some woman in town heard about this girl in labor, and maybe they had a midwife. Maybe Joseph has to help her. What an environment to give birth. You just don't want to give birth in this location. This is as low as it gets. My wife loves to decorate for Christmas. I'm sure she's thinking about that. Some of you have your decorations kind of stored somewhere, ready to, you can think about that. And one of the things that's part of our decorations at Christmas is cinnamon. I don't know where cinnamon came from as part of the Christmas story, but it's a very nice smell in our house. I always look forward to it. I came back from this trip and I said, sweetheart, if you really want the smell of Christmas in our house, I can help you with that candle. And she said, no, don't even think about it. The comparison between the King of Bethlehem and the King of Kings is unbelievable, is it not? All the wealth in the world to a man who was as cruel and paranoid as you could possibly imagine. Indeed, he killed all of the infants in Bethlehem and the surrounding villages, somehow afraid that this report of a new king could somehow threaten him, and he's only got a few months to live. It's insane. He was insane. Jesus, with nothing, and he never had anything other than what he wore, has influenced the world to this moment. If it hadn't been for Jesus, I don't think any of us would even have heard the name Herod the Great. I mean, the ruins, maybe if you were an archaeologist or something, or a historian, but most of us would have never heard of Herod except for Jesus. Now, I'm done with this presentation, but I am going to leave you with a question. It's October. Christmas is coming up. We're going to have sales, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. You know all the sales. My question is, how did we get to a point as a culture in your lifetimes, and I'm looking at people who've lived through some decades, how did we get to a point where the birth of Jesus has become the most important economic season of the year for our culture? How is it that we're celebrating the birth of Jesus in a way that Herod the Great would love and Jesus wouldn't even recognize? This just does not make sense. Now, I am not against gifts. If my family's watching, I am expecting a couple of gifts this year, okay? We have grandchildren. We love to watch them open the presents. Having joy in light of the gift of the world, the gift of Jesus, that God gave us, well, that makes sense. I can understand why people would exchange gifts. But to get so carried away that it's all about the stuff, so that children know only about Santa Claus and they don't know why we ever started this holiday, that's tragic. It's just tragic. Now, my question is, second part of this question is, what are you going to do about this Christmas? Because there's time. There's time. What are you going to do to communicate to children, grandchildren, maybe you have great-grandchildren, that in your home, in your life, as for me and my house, this holiday is about the Lord. This holiday is about Jesus. I'm going to give you some gifts, but I'm going to give you more than that. You know, what kind of practical things can you do? Obviously, you probably read the Christmas story as a family, as a couple, as an individual on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, whatever. That's phenomenal. You know, that's really good. But what else can you do? Because we have got to communicate to that next generation, that very young generation. A few minutes ago, we had preschoolers all over this room. They have to know what Christmas is about. Don't you agree? Amen. And it's up to you and me to teach them. Not some preacher, not somebody on TV, but it's up to us to teach each generation at a time. So my prayer for you is you'll figure out how to get that done and you'll waste no time doing it this Christmas. All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break.